A cruel millionaire forced her daughter's waiter boyfriend to sing at a party to humiliate him. However, when he started singing, everyone was left speechless. Catherine Whitmore stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, a glass of vintage wine in hand, watching the golden lights of New York City stretch endlessly beneath her. The city was hers, or at least that's how it felt. She had spent decades building her empire, turning Whitmore Enterprises into a global powerhouse in luxury real estate, exclusive resorts, and high-end fashion. For Catherine, success wasn't just about money, it was about control. She controlled the market, the people she worked with, and most importantly, her daughter, Lauren. Lauren had been raised in perfection, private schools, summers in Europe, and a strict set of expectations. She was the heir to a dynasty, and Catherine had carefully sculpted her future. But lately, something had been off. There was a change in her daughter's behavior. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Lauren had been smiling more, sneaking off to places without explanation. When asked, she would brush it off with a casual, "Just meeting some friends." "Mom." Catherine, however, wasn't a woman who accepted uncertainty. One evening, as they dined at an exclusive restaurant where tables were booked months in advance, Catherine noticed the way Lauren's gaze lingered across the room. She followed her daughter's line of sight and landed on a young man in a crisp white shirt and black vest. A waiter. Catherine's jaw clenched. A waiter. She didn't say anything at first, she observed. The way Lauren's eyes lit up when he passed by. The way he stole glances at her. Not with the nervousness of a man intimidated by wealth, but with something far more dangerous. Genuine admiration that night. Catherine made a call. Within hours, she had his name, his background, his entire life story laid out in front of her. Ethan Carter, 26, no college degree, worked multiple jobs since he was 16, parents deceased, lives in a modest Brooklyn apartment, aspiring musician. Catherine let out a humorless chuckle. Aspiring musician, of course. It was always the same with men like him. Dreamers, drifters, men with no sense of stability. Lauren was in love with him. Catherine knew it before her daughter had the chance to say it, and that, more than anything, was unacceptable. A Whitmore didn't fall for a man like Ethan Carter. The next morning, as Lauren sipped her espresso at the breakfast table, Catherine casually placed a blue velvet box in front of her. Lauren arched a brow. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a dazzling engagement ring, a Whitmore family heirloom worth millions. Lauren's breath hitched. "Mom, what?" "I spoke to William," Catherine interrupted smoothly, referring to William Sinclair, the son of one of New York's wealthiest investment tycoons. "He's ready to propose." Lauren's face hardened. "You spoke to him. Of course it's the perfect match, Lauren. The two of you will be unstoppable." Lauren swallowed, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. "I don't love William," she said firmly. Catherine let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Darling, love is a concept for the weak. People like us don't marry for love. We marry for power, for legacy." Lauren pushed the box away. "I'm not marrying him." Catherine's expression barely shifted, but her voice cooled. "Then who, Lauren?" "That waiter." The silence between them thickened. Lauren stood, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "I knew you'd never understand." "Understand?" Catherine leaned forward. "Lauren, do you have any idea what people will say? What this will do to our name?" "I don't care." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you leave me no choice," Lauren faltered. "What does that mean?" Catherine stood gracefully, her movements controlled, deliberate. "If you continue this ridiculous infatuation, you will be cut off. No money, no inheritance, no Whitmore name." Lauren's heart pounded. "You wouldn't..." Catherine tilted her head. "Try me." The weight of her mother's words settled in Lauren's chest like a stone. She should have expected this. Catherine never allowed anyone to challenge her authority, not even her own daughter. That night, Lauren sat in her room, staring at her phone. Her fingers hovered over Ethan's contact. She wanted to tell him everything, that her mother had threatened to cut her off, that she was scared, that she didn't know what to do. But then she thought about him, about his dreams, his music, the way he believed in her even when she doubted herself. She knew what her mother wanted. Catherine wanted her to cave, to be the perfect daughter who obeyed without question. But Lauren was done being controlled. And Catherine wasn't going to sit back and let her daughter throw everything away over some nobody. She had built this empire, and she would burn anyone who threatened it, even if that meant destroying Ethan Carter. Lauren sat in the backseat of a black town car, staring out at the shimmering lights of Manhattan. The city had always felt like home, but tonight, the towering buildings and bustling streets seemed suffocating. Her mother's ultimatum rang in her ears. No money, no inheritance, no Whitmore name. She clenched her fists on her lap. Was Catherine really willing to disown her over this? Over Ethan? Yes. Catherine Whitmore didn't make idle threats. If she said something, she meant it. Lauren exhaled sharply. She had spent her whole life being the perfect daughter, the one who attended charity galas, smiled at business partners, and dated men from the right families. She had never questioned the role she was expected to play, until Ethan. Her heart skipped a beat. Just thinking about him, she had met him 3 months ago at Le Bernardin, one of New York's most prestigious restaurants. It was supposed to be another dull evening. Another business dinner where her mother paraded her like a prize before her wealthy associates. But then, she had looked up from her untouched plate and met his eyes. Ethan. He wasn't like the other waiters, those who moved quietly, never making eye contact with the elite patrons. There was something different about him. A quiet confidence, a spark of life that made her chest tighten. And then, as if the universe had conspired to change everything, he had smiled. That smile, a warm, unguarded moment in a world of polished perfection. That was the night everything changed. Lauren hadn't intended to fall for Ethan at first. It was just curiosity, a few conversations stolen in between courses, a passing joke about the absurdity of some rich diners. But soon, she found herself looking forward to those nights, waiting for the next dinner, the next fleeting moment with him. And then one night she had done something reckless. She had gone back to the restaurant after hours, knocking on the door as Ethan and his co-workers cleaned up. "What are you doing here?" he had asked, surprised but undeniably pleased. "I don't know," she had admitted. "I just wanted to talk to you." He had laughed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Well, in that case, let me make you a terrible cup of coffee." And just like that, she had stepped into his world. The late-night walks through Brooklyn, the music he played on his old guitar, the stories he told about his childhood, growing up with nothing but big dreams. It was intoxicating. He was intoxicating. Now, she was at a crossroads. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Lauren, can I see you?" She hesitated for a moment before pressing send. The reply came almost immediately. "Ethan, always." A small smile tugged at her lips. 30 minutes later, she was in Brooklyn. The contrast was stark. The polished glass towers of Manhattan were replaced with brick buildings covered in ivy, narrow streets buzzing with life. It wasn't the world she was raised in, but she found it strangely comforting. Ethan was waiting outside his apartment when she arrived. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had just run his hands through it, and he wore a plain white t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits of the men her mother approved of. But to her, he looked perfect. "Hey," he said, his voice low and warm. Lauren stepped closer, feeling a weight lift off her chest. "Hey," he studied her face. "You okay?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to pretend everything was fine. Instead, her voice cracked when she said, "My mother knows." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And she's furious." A slow sigh escaped him. "Not surprised. She gave me an ultimatum." Lauren swallowed hard. "If I stay with you, I lose everything." Silence. Then, Ethan smiled slightly. "Guess that makes me the bad guy in your mother's story." Lauren let out a shaky laugh. "Oh, definitely." Ethan reached for her hands. "Lauren, I don't want to be the reason you lose your family." She shook her head. "No, Ethan. She's the reason. She's the one making this about power and control. Not us." Ethan squeezed her hands. "Are you sure about this?" Lauren looked into his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had become her safe place in a world of expectations. "Yes." He let out a breath, shaking his head in awe. "God, I love you." She blinked. her heart skipping. He had never said it before. She had never said it before, but the words came effortlessly. "I love you too," Ethan grinned. "Well, that's good, because I had this really dramatic plan to sing a heartbreak song if you dumped me." Lauren burst out laughing, her chest light for the first time in days. But the moment of happiness was short-lived, because Catherine Whitmore wasn't done yet. Far from it. She wasn't the kind of woman to sit back and let things unfold naturally. She had spent her entire life molding the world to her liking, and right now, the world was not bending in her favor. So, she would make it bend, even if it meant breaking Ethan Carter in the process. Lauren sat on the edge of Ethan's worn-out couch, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the fabric. The dim light of his Brooklyn apartment cast soft shadows on the walls, making everything feel cozier, safer than the suffocating grandeur of her mother's penthouse. Ethan sat beside her, one arm draped over the back of the couch. Watching her in silence, he could see the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, the storm raging behind those beautiful green eyes. "Talk to me," he said gently. Lauren sighed, running a hand through her golden waves. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with how you feel." She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "How I feel trapped, like I'm being torn in two directions, and no matter what I choose, I lose something." Ethan leaned forward. "You don't have to choose, Lauren. Your mother is making it seem like you do, but she's wrong. You don't have to sacrifice love for stability, or stability for love. You can have both." She met his gaze, vulnerability flickering across her face. "And how do I do that when my mother is determined to rip us apart?" Ethan hesitated. He knew Catherine Whitmore wasn't the type to back down if she wanted something, whether it was a business deal, a social connection, or complete control over her daughter's life. She got it, and right now, she wanted him gone. But Ethan wasn't going anywhere. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. Lauren sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I just wish she could see you the way I do." Ethan chuckled. "That would require her to see me as a person instead of a nuisance." Lauren smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know she's ruthless, but she's my mother. A part of me keeps hoping she'll understand, that she'll change." Ethan didn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. Catherine Whitmore didn't change. Lauren lifted her head. "Promise me one thing. Anything. No matter what happens, no matter what she does. Promise me you won't walk away." Ethan cupped her face gently. "Lauren, the only way I'd ever walk away from you is if you told me to." Her heart ached at his words. "Then we fight." He grinned. "We fight." But neither of them knew just how dirty Catherine Whitmore was willing to play. The storm begins. Catherine stood in her study, swirling a glass of whiskey as she listened to the voice on the other end of the phone. "I can handle it, Mrs. Whitmore. Say the word, and Ethan Carter will be nothing more than a bad memory." Catherine smirked. It was embarrassingly easy to get dirt on someone like Ethan. A few phone calls, a few well-placed threats, and suddenly, she had everything she needed to dismantle his life. "No," she said smoothly. "I don't want him gone. That would be too easy. I want him broken." A pause. "Understood." She hung up and took a slow sip of her drink. Satisfaction curling at the edges of her lips. Lauren thought she was in love, but love was fragile, and Catherine was about to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. 2 days later, Ethan arrived at work to find his manager waiting for him at the entrance. "Carter," the older man sighed, rubbing his temples. "I need to talk to you." Ethan frowned, noticing the tension in his boss's shoulders. "What's going on?" The man handed him an envelope. Ethan opened it, his stomach tightening as he scanned the letter. Termination. Effective immediately. "What?" He looked up, disbelief in his eyes. "I'm fired," his boss exhaled. "It wasn't my call. The owner got a call from some very powerful people, saying they'd withdraw their investments if you weren't let go." Ethan's blood ran cold. He didn't need to ask who had made that call. Catherine Whitmore. She was cutting off his livelihood, making sure he had nothing left to offer Lauren. "Look, kid," his boss said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're good at what you do. You'll land on your feet." Ethan forced a tight smile. "Yeah, thanks." But as he walked out of the restaurant for the last time, a dark realization settled in his chest. This wasn't just about money. This was about power. And Catherine had all of it. Ethan didn't tell Lauren right away. He didn't want her to feel guilty, didn't want her to know how far her mother was willing to go. But Catherine wasn't done. 3 days later, his landlord knocked on his door. "Carter, got bad news," the older man sighed, handing Ethan a letter. "You're being evicted." Ethan stared at him, his mind reeling. "Evicted? I pay my rent on time." The landlord scratched his head. "Yeah, but the building just changed owners, new management. They want to renovate, and all current tenants gotta go." "New management?" Ethan's hands clenched. Catherine bought the damn building. She was stripping him of everything. His job, his home, his dignity. This wasn't just a warning. This was a war, and Ethan refused to lose. That night, Lauren found Ethan sitting on the floor of his now empty apartment, staring at his guitar. The second she saw him, she knew something was wrong. "Ethan," she whispered, dropping to her knees in front of him. "Talk to me," he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "She's trying to destroy me, Lauren." Lauren's throat tightened. "What happened?" "My job, my apartment, it's all gone." His voice was steady, but his fists were clenched. "Your mother made sure of it." Lauren's stomach twisted. How far would Catherine go? "I won't let her win," she said fiercely. Ethan met her gaze. "Then marry me." Lauren's breath caught. "Ethan, she wants to control us, to keep us apart," he said. "Let's take that power away from her." Lauren's heart pounded. The idea was reckless, insane, but wasn't love supposed to be reckless? She cupped his face. "Okay." Ethan's breath hitched. "Okay." She smiled. "Let's get married." And just like that, the war had truly begun. Lauren clutched Ethan's hand as they walked through the dimly lit streets of Brooklyn. The weight of their decision pressed heavily on her chest, but she had never felt more certain about anything in her life. They were doing the right thing. They had to. Ethan had lost everything. His job, his home, his security, all because of her mother's relentless need for control. Catherine wasn't just trying to separate them. She was trying to erase Ethan from her life completely, but Lauren refused to let that happen. Their footsteps echoed softly against the pavement as they approached the small chapel tucked between two brick buildings. It wasn't grand or extravagant like the places Lauren had grown up in, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the promise they were about to make to each other. Ethan turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" Lauren smiled, though her heart was pounding. "I've never been more sure of anything." Inside, an old minister greeted them with a kind smile. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Love stories like theirs weren't uncommon in a city like New York, where people ran from pasts, families, expectations. With only a handful of strangers as witnesses, Lauren and Ethan stood side by side, hands intertwined. The ceremony was simple. Nothing like the grand wedding Catherine had always envisioned for her daughter. No lavish decorations, no high-profile guests, no designer dress, just them. As Ethan slipped the modest ring onto her finger, Lauren felt a surge of emotions unlike anything she had ever known. This was love, raw, real, untouched by money or status. "You may now kiss the bride." Ethan didn't hesitate. He cupped her face gently, his lips pressing against hers with unwavering certainty. For the first time in weeks, it felt like they had won, but their victory was short-lived. They returned to Ethan's near-empty apartment, the last of his belongings packed in a single duffel bag. There was no honeymoon, no celebration. Their future was uncertain, but at least they had each other, or so they thought. The next morning, Lauren woke to a sharp knock on the door. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and glanced at Ethan, who was already awake, his body tense. Another knock, louder this time. Ethan stood, pulling on a t-shirt as he moved toward the door. The moment he opened it, a cold wave of dread settled in his stomach. Catherine Whitmore stood there, her expression calm but her eyes blazing with fury. Lauren's heart stopped. Ethan tightened his grip on the doorknob. "How did you—" Catherine stepped forward, her presence consuming the tiny space. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Lauren swallowed hard. "Mom, Catherine's sharp gaze landed on her daughter. "Don't." Ethan squared his shoulders. "We're married," he said, his voice steady. You can't change that. A slow smile curled at Catherine's lips, but there was nothing warm about it. Oh, Ethan, she sighed, shaking her head. You still think this is a fight you can win? Lauren moved closer to Ethan, gripping his arm. We're not playing your games anymore. Catherine's expression didn't waver. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers. Then let's stop pretending. She tossed the papers onto the table. Lauren's stomach twisted as she stepped forward and unfolded them. Annulment papers. I suggest you sign them before this gets messy, Catherine said smoothly. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Messy. You've already destroyed my life. Oh, Ethan, don't be dramatic. Catherine clasped her hands together. You losing a dead-end job and a rat-infested apartment isn't exactly a tragedy. Lauren's blood boiled. You have no right. I have every right, Catherine interrupted, turning to her daughter. I gave you everything, Lauren. And this is how you repay me, running off in the middle of the night like some rebellious teenager. I'm not a child, Lauren snapped, and I won't let you control me anymore. Catherine studied her for a moment before exhaling as if this whole situation bored her. I expected more from you, but it's not too late to fix your mistake. She gestured to the papers. Sign them. Lauren shook her head. No. Catherine turned to Ethan. And you? Ethan crossed his arms. Not a chance. For the first time, a flicker of frustration passed over Catherine's face. She wasn't used to hearing the word no. She took a slow step forward, lowering her voice. Ethan, I could ruin you. And I'm not talking about cutting off your job opportunities or buying your apartment complex. I could drag your name through the mud so badly that no one in this city would hire you. You think you're struggling now? Imagine what happens when I make sure no one even looks in your direction. Ethan's jaw clenched. But he didn't look away. Catherine continued, her voice eerily calm. Lauren will move on. She'll thank me for this one day. But you'll be nothing. Lauren stepped between them, her pulse pounding. Stop it, Mom. Catherine sighed, rubbing her temple. You're forcing my hand, sweetheart. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then do it. Ruin me. Take everything. But it won't change the fact that Lauren and I love each other. Catherine tilted her head, watching him closely. Then, as if she had just thought of something brilliant, a slow smirk tugged at her lips. No, Ethan, she said softly. I won't ruin you. Lauren frowned. What are you talking about? Catherine turned to her daughter, her gaze filled with something dangerous. I'll ruin him. Lauren's stomach dropped. I'll take everything he has left. His name, his reputation, his future. Catherine stepped back toward the door. And when he's got nothing, you'll see. Lauren, you'll understand. You'll thank me. Ethan didn't move. He didn't blink. But Lauren felt the tremor in his hand when she grabbed it. Because for the first time, he realized the war had only just begun, and Catherine Whitmore was about to tear them apart in ways they never imagined. Lauren stared at the door long after Catherine had left, her mother's words still slicing through the air like a blade. She could feel the cold weight of the annulment papers still sitting on the table, as if they carried the full force of Catherine's will, an unspoken warning that this was far from over. Ethan sat on the couch, rubbing his temples. His jaw was tight, his hands balled into fists. She's not going to stop, he muttered. She's just getting started. Lauren swallowed hard. I know. He turned to her, his expression a mix of frustration and something deeper, something dangerously close to fear. She didn't even sound angry, Lauren. She sounded sure, like she already knows exactly what she's going to do next. A cold shiver ran down Lauren's spine. Her mother didn't make empty threats. Every word she spoke was calculated, sharpened into a weapon long before it ever left her lips. If she had left here confident, it meant she was already setting something in motion. Lauren grabbed the annulment papers and ripped them in half. We're not letting her win. Ethan let out a breath, his gaze steady on hers. Then we have to be ready. They were in this together. But Catherine had spent a lifetime building empires and crushing opposition. She knew how to play the game better than anyone. And the first move was hers. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. He groaned, reaching for it, blinking against the harsh light of the screen. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, Yeah, Mr. Carter, a voice crisp and formal. This is Andrew Royce, legal counsel for Whitmore Enterprises. We need to discuss an urgent matter." Ethan sat up, his stomach tightening. "I don't have anything to discuss with Whitmore Enterprises." Royce cleared his throat. "Actually, you do. We received a formal complaint regarding your conduct, and I wanted to offer you the courtesy of hearing it directly from us before the media picks it up." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Allegations, Mr. Carter, of fraud, theft, and misconduct." "What?" Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed, his pulse hammering. "That's bullshit. We have several witness statements, reports of you engaging in unethical activities while employed at Le Bernardin, even a suggestion that you misrepresented yourself to certain patrons. One patron in particular, Lauren." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. "You think I used Lauren?" "Not me, Mr. Carter, but there are reports that paint you as a man who saw an opportunity and took it." Royce sighed, as if this were all very unfortunate. "Of course we could settle this quietly. If you sign the annulment papers, the allegations disappear. If not, I can't guarantee the damage to your reputation will be reversible." Ethan's vision blurred with anger. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this was. Catherine. She wasn't just trying to ruin him. She was trying to turn him into a scandal. A manipulative con artist who had wormed his way into Lauren's life to secure his own fortune. And the worst part, people would believe it. It didn't matter that it was a lie. It didn't matter that he had never taken a damn dime from Lauren, that he had fallen for her long before he even knew who she really was. All that mattered was the story, and Catherine was about to write it for the world to see. Ethan clenched his teeth. "Tell Catherine she can go to hell." Royce sighed again. "That's unfortunate." The call ended. Lauren was already awake, standing in the doorway, her expression tight with worry. "What happened?" Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "She's trying to frame me." Lauren paled. "What?" "She's spreading rumors, telling people I was using you for money, and if I don't walk away, she's going to make it public." Lauren shook her head, her breath coming in short bursts. "She wouldn't." "Yes, she would." Ethan met her eyes. "And people will believe her." A sickening silence settled between them. Lauren had always known her mother was ruthless, but this wasn't just interference. This was destruction. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. "I'll call her. I'll tell her to stop." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "She's not going to stop, Lauren. You can't reason with someone who doesn't care about the truth." Lauren's throat tightened. She wanted to believe her mother still had a heart somewhere beneath all that control. But deep down, she knew the truth. Catherine wasn't going to back down. Ethan stood pacing the room. "If this goes public, I won't just lose job opportunities. It'll follow me everywhere, every interview, every audition. No one is going to give me a chance if they think I'm some gold-digging fraud." Lauren felt helpless. This was what her mother did. She eliminated threats. She rewrote reality until the only version of the truth that remained was the one that suited her. And now, she was doing it to the man Lauren loved. "No." Lauren's voice was quiet but steady. "She's not going to get away with this." Ethan stopped pacing, looking at her. "Lauren, I'll talk to my father." Ethan frowned. "Your father?" Lauren took a deep breath. "She might be the face of Whitmore Enterprises, but my father still has influence. If there's anyone who can make her stop, it's him." Ethan hesitated. Lauren rarely talked about her father. He and Catherine had divorced years ago, and from what Ethan had gathered, he had never fought back against her. But maybe this time would be different. Lauren grabbed her coat. "I'll meet him for lunch. Try to get him to talk to her." Ethan wasn't sure if it would work, but they had to try something. Because if they didn't, Catherine wouldn't just take away his opportunities. She would destroy his future before it even began. Lauren arrived at the Sterling Club, a private members-only restaurant on the Upper East Side, where her father, Jonathan Whitmore, held his usual table the moment she stepped inside. She felt the weight of her last name pressing against her shoulders, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, the perfectly tailored suits. It was a world she had been raised in, but one that now felt suffocating. She spotted her father seated near the window, a glass of whiskey in front of him. Flipping through a financial newspaper, he had always been a calm, reserved man, the polar opposite of Catherine. Where her mother was sharp and aggressive, Jonathan was cool and calculated, a man who had built his wealth through quiet negotiations and strategic patience. When he saw her approaching, he set the paper aside, offering a small smile. "Lauren, this is a surprise." She slid into the seat across from him. "I need your help." Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her with a knowing look. "I take it this has something to do with your mother," Lauren exhaled. "She's trying to ruin Ethan. She's spreading lies, telling people he used me for money, making it impossible for him to find work. And if he doesn't sign annulment papers, she's going to destroy his reputation completely." Jonathan swirled the whiskey in his glass, his expression unreadable. "And you think I can stop her?" "You can," Lauren insisted. "You still have influence at Whitmore Enterprises? You still have leverage?" Her father let out a quiet chuckle. "Leverage against Catherine." He shook his head. "That's wishful thinking, sweetheart. Your mother doesn't bow to anyone." Lauren clenched her fists. "Dad, please. She's not just interfering. She's ruining someone's life. Someone I love." At that, Jonathan finally looked at her closely. "You love him?" Lauren nodded without hesitation. "I do." For a moment, her father said nothing. Then he sighed, setting his glass down. "You know, I once loved your mother that way." Lauren blinked, caught off guard. Jonathan never spoke about the past. "At first, she was magnetic," he continued, his voice softer than usual. "Ambitious, brilliant, determined. I thought we were partners. I thought we'd build an empire together." He gave a humorless smile. "But I was wrong. I was never her partner. I was just a stepping stone." Lauren swallowed hard. "She doesn't let go, Lauren. She doesn't forgive. And she doesn't lose." He looked at her carefully. "Are you ready for that fight?" Lauren's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right. I'll see what I can do." Relief flooded Lauren's chest. "Thank you. But," he added, his tone serious, "you need to prepare yourself. If I go against Catherine, she won't just retaliate against Ethan. She'll come after me too." Lauren hadn't considered that. "You're saying she'd destroy me?" Jonathan smirked. "Of course. That's how she wins." Lauren felt a deep pang of guilt. She had spent years being distant from her father, seeing him as the man who had walked away from her in Catherine's world. But now, she realized he hadn't walked away. He had escaped. And now, because of her, he was stepping back into Catherine's battlefield. Jonathan signaled the waiter. "Give me a few days. I'll see what I can do." Lauren exhaled, hoping for the first time in days that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat in a small cafe, staring at the job listings on his phone. Nothing. Every restaurant he had applied to had either ghosted him or given him a polite but firm rejection. The message was clear. Catherine had blacklisted him. He rubbed his face, frustration clawing at his chest. He had worked his whole life without ever needing a handout, without ever relying on someone else. But now, he was trapped. The chair across from him slid back, and when he looked up, he nearly knocked over his coffee. William Sinclair, Lauren's ex-almost fiancé, the man Catherine had chosen for her, the man Ethan had never actually met, but had heard plenty about. Harvard-educated, heir to a massive investment empire, the type of man who was born into success rather than earning it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What the hell do you want?" William gave him a smug smile. "Relax, Carter. I'm not here to fight you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Then why are you here?" William tilted his head, studying him like an amused predator sizing up weaker prey. "You and I both know this thing with Lauren won't last." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Funny, she seems to think otherwise." "Lauren's caught up in a fantasy," William said smoothly. "But sooner or later reality will hit her. And when it does, you'll be long gone." Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're wasting your time." "Am I?" William pulled something from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "A check?" Ethan didn't even look at it. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "You think you can buy me off?" William smirked. "I don't think I know." Ethan leaned forward. "You don't know a damn thing about me." William's smile didn't waver. "I know you're jobless. I know you're about to lose the last bit of stability you have left. And I know Catherine won't stop until you have nothing." Ethan stayed silent. Forcing himself to stay calm, William shrugged. That check. It's enough for you to start over. A new city, a fresh start. Hell, you could finally chase that music dream of yours without worrying about how to eat next week. Ethan's chest burned with anger. You can take it, William continued, standing up, buttoning his jacket, or you can watch Catherine rip your life apart, piece by piece. Ethan's eyes darkened. Get the hell out of my sight. William chuckled. Suit yourself. As he walked away, Ethan stared at the check on the table. It was a trap, a final insult. They thought he was that kind of man. A man who would take the money and run. They still didn't understand. Ethan Carter wasn't going anywhere, and he sure as hell wasn't for sale. Ethan stared at the check lying on the cafe table, the ink shimmering under the soft light. A small, taunting piece of paper that represented everything Catherine and William thought of him. A sellout, a gold digger, a man with a price. They believed that if they pressed him hard enough, he would break, that if the walls closed in around him, he would run. But they were wrong. His fingers clenched into fists before he grabbed the check, ripped it in half, then again, until the tiny pieces fluttered onto the table like scraps of a failed plan. Let them come. He wasn't going anywhere. Ethan pushed back his chair and left without another glance, his mind already racing. Catherine was tightening the noose, and now she had people like William playing along. He needed to be smarter, to think 3 steps ahead, just like she did. But first, he needed to see Lauren. Lauren paced her apartment, gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had spent the last 2 hours waiting for an update from her father, checking messages that never came. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation they had over lunch. His warning, his hesitation. Was he really willing to take on Catherine? Or had she just sent him into a war he wasn't prepared to fight? A knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. She rushed to open it, relief washing over her when she saw Ethan standing there. But the moment she met his eyes, she knew something was wrong. What happened? She asked immediately. Ethan stepped inside, running a hand through his hair. Your mother is playing dirtier than I thought. Lauren's stomach twisted. What did she do? Ethan exhaled. William, he showed up at the cafe today. Lauren frowned. William? Why? Ethan let out a humorless laugh. To offer me money. A way out. He thinks you'll get tired of this, that sooner or later you'll see reality and go back to your old life. So, he figured he'd make things easier by paying me to disappear. Lauren's eyes widened. He tried to buy you off. Yeah. Ethan crossed his arms. I tore the check in half and walked away. Lauren shook her head, anger bubbling in her chest. I can't believe him. Or my mother. Oh, I believe them. Ethan met her gaze. But this was just a test, Lauren. She's seeing how far she has to push before I break. Lauren grabbed his hands. She'll never break you. Ethan squeezed her fingers. She'll try. The thought sent a chill down Lauren's spine. Her mother was relentless, and if William was stepping in, it meant she was expanding her reach, trying to turn the people around them into weapons. I spoke to my father today, Lauren said, her voice quiet. Ethan straightened. And he's going to try to stop her. He still has influence at Whitmore Enterprises. If he puts enough pressure on her, maybe she'll back off. Ethan studied her. You really think he'll do it? Lauren hesitated. I don't know, but I need to believe he will. Ethan pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to her temple. Then we hold on to that. For now, it was all they had. The next morning, Catherine sat in her office, her gaze fixed on the documents spread out before her. Reports, contracts, allegations, everything she needed to end Ethan Carter for good. He hadn't taken the money. That was a mistake. She had been willing to give him a clean exit, a way to walk away with his dignity intact. But now, he was forcing her hand. Her intercom buzzed. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Jonathan Whitmore is here to see you. Catherine smiled coldly. Send him in. The door opened, and Jonathan stepped inside. Same confident stride, same calm demeanor. Catherine leaned back in her chair, eyeing him with mild amusement. To what do I owe this visit? Jonathan sat across from her, crossing one leg over the other. Lauren came to see me yesterday. Catherine's smile didn't waver. Oh, she told me what you're doing. His tone was measured, but Catherine saw the warning beneath it. And, she asked smoothly, Jonathan sighed. Catherine, let's be reasonable. You don't have to do this. Let them go. Catherine tilted her head. Let them go. She loves him, and you know Lauren. She's stubborn. The more you push, the more she'll resist. Catherine picked up a silver pen, twirling it between her fingers. And what? I should just allow her to throw her life away on some nobody. Jonathan leaned forward. You don't own her, Catherine. She narrowed her eyes. Don't I? His jaw tightened. If you don't stop this, I'll make sure every board member at Whitmore Enterprises knows exactly what you're doing. I still have allies, Catherine. People who don't appreciate these kinds of tactics. Catherine chuckled, shaking her head. Oh, Jonathan, you really think you can threaten me? Jonathan didn't blink. I think I can make things very inconvenient for you. Catherine studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stood. You always were too soft, she mused. That's why you left. You never had the stomach for the real work. Jonathan didn't respond. Catherine walked around the desk, stopping in front of him. You can go ahead and play the hero, Jonathan, but let me be clear. She leaned down, her voice icy. If you come for me, I will bury you. Jonathan stared at her, unshaken. Then, after a moment, he stood. I guess we'll see about that. He turned and walked out, leaving Catherine alone with her victory, except this wasn't over. She could feel it. A storm was coming, and she was more than ready to face it. Lauren sat by the window of Ethan's apartment, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The morning light poured in through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over the small, cluttered space. It was nothing like the sterile perfection of her mother's penthouse, and yet, she had never felt more at home. Ethan stood by the counter, flipping through job listings on his phone with a frown. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. They won't even give me an interview, he muttered. Not even the places that were hiring last week. Lauren set her cup down. She's pulling every string she has. Ethan sighed, tossing his phone onto the counter. I don't get it, Lauren. This isn't just about keeping us apart anymore. This is war. Lauren met his gaze, her heart tightening. She's trying to break you. Ethan exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, she's going to have to try harder. Lauren admired his resilience, but she also saw the exhaustion in his posture, the way his shoulders carried a weight that wasn't there before. Catherine's attacks weren't just about taking things away from him. They were about making him feel small. She wasn't just trying to remove him from Lauren's life. She was trying to make him believe he never belonged in it to begin with. Lauren stood and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. We'll find a way out of this, she whispered against his chest. Ethan kissed the top of her head. We have to. A knock at the door startled them both. Ethan frowned. Are you expecting someone? Lauren shook her head. No. Ethan walked over and opened the door, and the sight of Jonathan Whitmore standing in the hallway made them both freeze. Lauren's heart skipped. Dad? Jonathan gave her a small nod before glancing at Ethan. May I come in? Ethan hesitated, but eventually stepped aside, letting the older man enter. Jonathan took in the apartment. Small, modest, but full of warmth. He didn't say anything about it, though. Instead, he turned to Lauren. I had a meeting with your mother yesterday. Lauren swallowed hard. And, Jonathan sighed, slipping his hands into the pockets of his tailored coat. She's not going to back down. If anything, I think I made her worse. Ethan let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, that sounds about right. Jonathan exhaled. She wants complete control, Lauren. And if she can't have that, she'll settle for ruining everything in her path. Lauren's stomach twisted. What do we do? Jonathan turned his gaze to Ethan. I have a proposal for you. Ethan arched a brow. A proposal. I can't stop Catherine through legal channels. Not without drawing out a battle that will hurt Lauren just as much as it hurts her. But I do have something she values more than anything else. Ethan frowned. What? Jonathan's expression was unreadable. Information? Lauren felt a jolt of unease. Dad, what are you talking about? Jonathan took a deep breath. Your mother is not as untouchable as she thinks she is over the years. She's done things that, if made public, could destroy her empire. Ethan's eyes darkened. And you have proof. Jonathan nodded. I do. Enough to make the board question her leadership. Enough to make investors run. Enough to make her fall. Lauren felt her pulse quicken. Dad, if you expose her... I know, Jonathan said quietly. She'll never forgive me. Lauren's throat tightened. Are you sure you want to do this? Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time in years, she saw something fierce in his eyes. I should have done it a long time ago. Ethan crossed his arms. So what do you need from me? Jonathan exhaled. Your help. If I do this alone, she'll spin the narrative, make it look like a bitter ex-husband trying to get revenge. But if you're standing beside me, if we stand together, people will listen. Lauren's mind raced. This was huge. If her father had actual evidence of wrongdoing, this could end Catherine's reign of control for good. But it also meant war. Catherine would never forgive them for this. Ethan studied Jonathan for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'm in. Lauren took a deep breath. Me too. Jonathan gave a small, approving smile. Good, then we do this the right way. Ethan's jaw tightened. Which means... Jonathan turned toward the door. We take this to someone who can make it count. Lauren's pulse pounded. Who? Jonathan glanced back at them. The press. A heavy silence settled over the room. Lauren's heart raced as she looked at Ethan. If we do this, there's no going back. Ethan met her gaze. Then we don't look back. Lauren squeezed his hand. Determination setting in. Catherine had spent her whole life building her empire, playing the game, pulling the strings. But now, it was their turn to play. Lauren sat in the back seat of the taxi, gripping Ethan's hand tightly as the car weaved through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her chest. Her father had arranged the meeting with the Manhattan Globe, one of the city's most influential newspapers. If they went through with this, there would be no turning back. Catherine would see this as an act of war, and she would retaliate with everything she had. Ethan glanced at her, sensing her tension. You okay? Lauren exhaled. I don't know. He squeezed her hand. We're doing the right thing. She nodded. But deep down, she knew the right thing didn't always mean the easiest thing. When the taxi pulled up in front of the newspaper's headquarters, Jonathan was already waiting for them, dressed in a sharp navy suit. He looked composed, but Lauren could see the tightness in his jaw. He was just as aware of the storm they were about to unleash. Are you ready? Jonathan asked as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Ethan nodded. More than ever. Jonathan led them inside, past security, and straight to the editor-in-chief's office. The room smelled of ink and fresh coffee, its walls lined with framed front pages of historic headlines. A middle-aged man with graying hair sat behind the desk, flipping through documents that Jonathan had already provided. His name was Richard Calloway, a journalist known for exposing corruption. No matter where it came from, Calloway looked up, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Whitmore, I have to admit, when I got your message, I wasn't sure what to expect. But if what you're saying is true, he set the papers down, his sharp eyes moving between them. You're telling me you have evidence of Catherine Whitmore's illegal dealings? Jonathan nodded. Years' worth, financial records, fraudulent transactions, backroom deals, things that, if made public, would cause irreparable damage. Calloway leaned back in his chair. And why now? Why bring this to me? Jonathan hesitated, then looked at Lauren. Because it's time someone stood up to her. Lauren held her father's gaze, her throat tight. She had spent her entire life believing that her father had walked away from the fight against Catherine. But now, she understood. He hadn't been a coward. He had been waiting for the right moment. Calloway steepled his fingers. If I run this story, you realize what will happen. Don't you? Jonathan exhaled. She'll fight back. Calloway nodded. Viciously. And it won't just be against you. His gaze shifted to Ethan. You'll be at the center of it. She's already painted you as an opportunist. If this goes public, she'll double down. Ethan's expression remained unshaken. She can say whatever she wants. The truth is, the truth. Calloway studied him for a moment, then turned to Lauren. And you're willing to go against your own mother. Lauren's stomach twisted, but then she thought of everything Catherine had done. The manipulation, the threats, the way she had tried to destroy the man Lauren loved simply because he didn't fit her mold. Yes, she said firmly. I am. Calloway nodded slowly. All right, I'll need to verify everything, but if the evidence holds, we'll run the story. Jonathan slid a USB drive across the desk. "This has everything you need." Calloway picked it up, a slow smile forming. "Then let's take down a queen." The ride back to Brooklyn was quiet. Ethan kept his hand over Lauren's, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. She could feel his strength, his determination, but there was something else, too. Something unspoken. "What are you thinking?" she finally asked. Ethan exhaled, glancing out the window before turning back to her. "I'm thinking, this is it." Lauren frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated before saying, "After this, she's going to come at us with everything. You know that, right?" Lauren swallowed hard. "I do." Ethan searched her eyes. "And you're still willing to stand by me?" She cupped his face, forcing him to see her. "I'm not standing by you. Ethan, I'm with you. No matter what." Something in his expression softened, and then he kissed her. Not just a kiss of passion, but one of promise, of war. Across town, in her penthouse office, Catherine Whitmore sat at her desk, sipping her usual evening scotch when her assistant rushed in, panic evident in her eyes. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Catherine arched a brow, irritated by the interruption. "See what?" The assistant handed her a tablet. It just leaked. Catherine took the device and pressed play. A news anchor filled the screen. "Breaking news. Whitmore Enterprises faces potential scandal as new allegations surface regarding CEO Catherine Whitmore's past business dealings. Sources indicate that several documents have been turned over to the press, outlining questionable financial activities." The glass in Catherine's hand tightened. Then, crack. The glass shattered in her grip. Whiskey and shards of crystal spilled onto the polished wood of her desk. Her assistant flinched. Taking a step back, Catherine set the broken glass down, her breathing controlled but her expression deadly. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. Her assistant swallowed hard. "The report names Jonathan Whitmore, but it also mentions Ethan Carter." Catherine closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. Then, a slow, cold smile spread across her lips. So, they wanted war. They were about to find out what happened when someone dared to go against her. The storm broke faster than they expected. Lauren and Ethan woke to a flood of news alerts, calls, and messages. Every headline screamed the same thing. Catherine Whitmore under fire for corporate corruption allegations. Lauren sat up in bed, scrolling through article after article. The media was eating it up. Jonathan's leaked documents were everywhere, exposing years of Catherine's questionable business dealings. Ethan, sitting beside her, rubbed his face. "This is bigger than I thought." Lauren kept reading, her stomach twisting. Some reports were calling for a board investigation. Others hinted at possible lawsuits. "She'll retaliate," Ethan murmured. Lauren nodded. "She already has." She turned the phone toward him. A new headline flashed across the screen. "Ethan Carter, the man who manipulated a Whitmore heiress." Ethan exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "They're calling me a con artist," he muttered, reading the accusations. "That I played you to get to your father. That I helped leak the documents for my own benefit." Lauren clenched her fists. This is all her. She's spinning the story. Another notification popped up. Ethan swiped his phone open, only to see a new wave of rejection emails. "No one is going to hire me now," he said bitterly. "Not after this." Lauren grabbed his hand. "We knew she'd do this, but the truth is out there now. She's losing control." Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, then why does it feel like she's winning?" A knock at the door interrupted them. Lauren's heart leaped into her throat. "You don't think—" Ethan shook his head, already moving. He checked the peephole, tensed, then opened the door. Jonathan stood there looking exhausted. "We need to talk," he said. Ethan let him in, and Jonathan immediately grabbed the remote. Flipping to the news, a panel of commentators were already debating the scandal. This could be a devastating blow to Catherine Whitmore's empire. But let's not forget the timing of this leak. Could this have been orchestrated by her ex-husband as a personal vendetta? And what about the connection to Lauren Whitmore and her husband? Ethan Carter. There are whispers that Ethan played a key role in gathering these documents. Ethan shut the TV off. Jonathan sighed. "She's doing what she does best, diverting the attention." Lauren shook her head. "How do we fight back?" Jonathan hesitated. "We can't, not the way she plays. The media loves a villain." And right now, she's painting you as the master manipulator who brought her down. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Great. But, Jonathan continued, there's something she doesn't have. Lauren frowned. What? Jonathan met Ethan's gaze. Your story. Ethan stiffened. She's making you the villain, Jonathan said. But if you speak first, if you get ahead of her, people will listen. Ethan exhaled. So you want me to give an interview? Jonathan nodded. Tell the truth, who you are, what she did to you, why she's afraid of you. Lauren grabbed Ethan's hand. You don't have to do this. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he set his jaw. She's already ruined my name, he murmured. I might as well tell the truth before she rewrites it completely. The interview was scheduled for that evening. A primetime segment. A chance to speak to the world before Catherine controlled the entire narrative. The studio buzzed with energy as producers prepped for the live broadcast. The host, Rachel Morrison, was one of the most respected journalists in the industry. She wasn't known for easy interviews. Ethan adjusted his mic, nerves settling in his stomach. Lauren squeezed his knee. You're going to do great. He nodded, but he could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. This wasn't just about defending himself. This was about fighting back. The cameras rolled. The red light blinked. Rachel Morrison leaned forward, her expression neutral but sharp. Ethan Carter, she began. The man at the center of one of the biggest scandals in recent history. People want to know. Are you the con artist Catherine Whitmore says you are? Ethan took a slow breath. No, I'm not. Rachel held his gaze. Then tell us, who are you? Ethan looked into the camera, into the eyes of millions of people watching. My name is Ethan Carter. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I lost my parents when I was a kid. I grew up working multiple jobs, trying to survive, trying to build a future for myself. I never had wealth or connections or power, but I never needed them. Rachel nodded. And your relationship with Lauren Whitmore? Ethan's jaw tightened. I love her. That's the truth. I didn't chase her for her name. I didn't manipulate her. I met her at a restaurant. I was a waiter. She was a customer. And somehow we found each other. Rachel glanced at her notes. Catherine Whitmore has accused you of using Lauren for financial gain. Ethan let out a dry laugh. If I wanted money, do you really think I would have spent months struggling? Losing my job? Getting evicted? Do you think I would have let her blacklist me from every job I applied for? If I cared about her money, I would have taken the check her fiancé offered me to disappear. Rachel arched a brow. Fiancé? Ethan nodded. William Sinclair. He offered me a blank check to walk away. I tore it up. Rachel's eyes flickered with interest. That was new information. And the recent leaks exposing Catherine Whitmore's alleged illegal activities, she pressed. Ethan met her gaze. I had nothing to do with them, but I'm glad they came out. People need to know who she really is. Rachel leaned in. And who is she? Ethan didn't hesitate. She's a woman who destroys anything she can't control. A tense silence filled the studio. Then Rachel turned to the camera. There you have it, Ethan Carter, in his own words. The truth, or his version of it. The segment ended. The moment the red light switched off, Lauren grabbed Ethan's hand. You were amazing, she whispered. Ethan exhaled. I don't know if it was enough. Jonathan checked his phone. We'll find out soon. Because somewhere across town, Catherine Whitmore was watching. And whatever she was planning next, it would be worse than anything they had seen before. Catherine Whitmore sat in the dim glow of her office, the large screen before her broadcasting Ethan Carter's interview in high definition. She watched every second, her expression unreadable, her fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the surface of her mahogany desk. When the interview ended, silence stretched in the room. Then, with calculated precision, she reached for her crystal glass, took a slow sip of her scotch, and placed it down without a sound. Her assistant, Meredith, stood at the edge of the room, visibly tense, awaiting orders. Well, Catherine said finally, exhaling a long breath. He's more resilient than I expected. Meredith swallowed. The public response is, I don't care about the public. Catherine cut in smoothly, standing and walking toward the massive window overlooking the city skyline. They'll believe whatever narrative is the loudest. She turned, cold determination gleaming in her eyes. It's time to silence him. Meredith hesitated. You want me to? I want him destroyed. Catherine's voice was calm, but beneath it lay the sharp edge of a woman who never lost. Public humiliation wasn't enough. Blacklisting wasn't enough now. She smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Now, we make sure there's no coming back for Ethan Carter. Meredith exhaled. And how do you propose we do that? Catherine walked to her desk and picked up a sleek folder, flipping it open. Inside were dozens of documents, reports, records, pieces of information that, on their own, meant little. But together, they were a carefully crafted weapon. Find me a reporter who's desperate enough to run a story without checking the facts, Catherine ordered, sliding the folder across the desk. Meredith hesitated before taking it. And if Lauren tries to stop this? Catherine's lips curled. She won't, because by the time Lauren found out, it would be too late. Ethan and Lauren spent the morning at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, trying to catch their breath after the interview. The night before had been overwhelming. Phone calls, messages, journalists trying to dig deeper into their lives. But the strangest part, there was support. For the first time, people were starting to question Catherine's perfect public image. Ethan scrolled through social media, surprised to see posts defending him. Maybe Catherine Whitmore isn't the saint she pretends to be. If Ethan Carter was really a gold digger, why would he expose himself like this, think people? Whitmore Enterprises needs to be investigated. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Lauren leaned over, glancing at his screen. See, people are starting to believe you. Ethan let out a slow breath. Yeah, but it won't last. Lauren frowned. Why would you say that? Ethan knew Catherine. She wasn't going to let a single interview change the game. If anything, this was when she was at her most dangerous. She's planning something, he muttered. Lauren reached for his hand. Then we stay ahead of her. Ethan nodded, but deep down, he knew, they were already too late. By noon, the attack had begun. Lauren's phone buzzed first, then Ethan's, then Jonathan's. News alerts flooded their screens, breaking. New allegations surface against Ethan Carter. The truth behind his past. Ethan's blood ran cold as he clicked the link. Ethan Carter, the so-called struggling musician, has a past far darker than he let on. Sources claim Carter was involved in multiple financial scams in his early 20s, deceiving employers and manipulating women for personal gain. Documents suggest he used false identities to apply for loans, racking up thousands in unpaid debts before disappearing. If true, this paints a much different picture than the one he sold to the public last night. Could Catherine Whitmore have been right all along? Lauren's face drained of color. Oh my God. Ethan gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. This is all lies, he said, voice low and controlled, but Lauren could see the fury building beneath the surface. She clicked on another article, another hit piece, another fabrication, and the worst part, there were fake documents attached, fabricated bank statements, false loan applications with his name, witness testimonies from people he had never even met. Catherine had manufactured an entire criminal past for him. Lauren's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. So he was a scammer, damn. Whitmore was right. Wait, how did this guy fake his whole life? Is this real? Lauren, girl, if you're reading this, run. Lauren looked up at Ethan. His expression was like stone, but she could see it. The devastation, the rage. She did this, he whispered. Lauren grabbed his hand. We can fix this. Ethan let out a sharp laugh. How? You think people are going to believe me over her? Lauren's stomach twisted. We need proof that these documents are fake. That this is all... They don't care. Ethan ran a hand over his face. You know how this works, Lauren. Once a lie is out there, it never fully disappears. It doesn't matter if we prove her wrong, this stain. It's on me forever. Lauren shook her head. No, I won't let her do this to you. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know if you have a choice. Lauren clenched her jaw. No, she wasn't going to let Catherine win. We go back to my father, she said firmly. We find out what we can use against her. Ethan hesitated. Lauren, no, I'm done playing nice. She wants a war, then let's give her one. Ethan watched her for a moment, then nodded, because Catherine Whitmore had just made her biggest mistake. She thought she could destroy Ethan, but she had just unleashed something far worse. Lauren wasn't afraid of her anymore, and that That was the beginning of Catherine's downfall. Lauren stormed into her father's townhouse, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floors. Her entire body trembled with rage, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had never been this angry before. Jonathan had barely stepped aside when she turned on him, her voice trembling with fury. "She fabricated an entire criminal history for him," Lauren seethed. "This isn't just manipulation anymore, Dad. She's trying to destroy him." Jonathan sighed heavily, closing the door behind them. His usual composed expression was overshadowed by something tired, like a man who had fought this war before and lost. Ethan followed behind her, his hands clenched into fists. He hadn't said much since the scandal broke that morning, but Lauren could feel his anger in the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath came slower, measured, like he was holding back a storm. "She's making me out to be a scammer, a con artist," he finally said, voice low but dangerous. "And people are eating it up." Jonathan ran a hand over his face. "I saw the articles." Lauren turned on him, desperate. "Then help us. Tell me you still have something we can use against her." Jonathan watched them both for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line before he exhaled and walked toward his desk. "I do," he admitted. "But this isn't just about business fraud anymore. If we go after her, we're taking everything from her." Ethan crossed his arms. "She didn't hesitate to do the same to me." Jonathan nodded, then pulled out a sleek black folder from the bottom drawer. He hesitated for a second before sliding it across the desk. Lauren reached for it, flipping it open. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan leaned in beside her, his brow furrowing as he scanned the pages. Bank transactions, offshore accounts, political donations that weren't just illegal, but outright criminal. Lauren felt her pulse hammering as she looked at her father. This is federal-level corruption." Jonathan nodded grimly. "It is." Ethan let out a low whistle. "If this gets out, she won't just lose Whitmore Enterprises," Jonathan said. "She'll go to prison." Lauren's hands trembled as she set the documents down. Catherine had always been ruthless, always played dirty. But this was criminal. If they leaked this, if this information went public, there would be no coming back for her mother. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Do we take this to the press?" Jonathan shook his head. "No. If we leak something like this, she'll have enough power left to control the damage. You need someone with real authority." Lauren swallowed hard. "Who?" Jonathan's voice was steady. "The feds." A heavy silence filled the room. Ethan sat back, rubbing his face. "Are we really doing this?" Lauren exhaled, her throat tightening. "Are we really willing to destroy her?" But then she thought about everything Catherine had done. The blackmail, the lies, the fabricated criminal past she had created for Ethan. Catherine hadn't just attacked Ethan's reputation. She had tried to erase him from existence. Lauren took a slow breath. "She made her choice," she whispered. "Now she has to live with the consequences." Ethan watched her, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he nodded. Jonathan grabbed his phone. "I'll make the call." Lauren reached for Ethan's hand under the table, because this was it. There was no turning back now. 2 days later, the world erupted. Lauren sat on the couch staring at the TV screen as a news anchor delivered the breaking story. In a shocking turn of events, federal authorities have launched an official investigation into Catherine Whitmore following allegations of financial crimes, including embezzlement, illegal campaign contributions, and offshore tax fraud. If convicted, the high-profile CEO could face serious legal repercussions. Lauren exhaled, her hands trembling. It had worked. Catherine was finally exposed. Ethan sat beside her, his gaze locked on the screen. "I still can't believe it." Jonathan, standing near the window, took a slow sip of whiskey. "Believe it? It's done." Lauren swallowed hard. "What happens next?" Jonathan sighed. "She'll fight. She always fights." But for the first time, Lauren saw doubt in her father's eyes, because even he wasn't sure if Catherine could win this one. Across town, Catherine Whitmore sat in silence in her penthouse office, staring at the flashing news alerts on her phone. Her hands were clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could hear the whispers already. The corporate board calling emergency meetings, investors pulling out, the vultures waiting to dismantle everything she built. A slow, bitter smile spread across her lips. They thought they had won. They thought they had beaten her. Fools. Catherine never lost. She picked up her phone, dialing a number she hadn't used in years. The voice on the other end was calm, expectant. "Ma'am." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I need a problem eliminated." A pause. Then, "Which one?" Catherine's grip on the phone tightened. "Ethan Carter." Ethan and Lauren stood by the window of their apartment, the weight of the last 2 days pressing down on them. The world knew the truth now, but the battle wasn't over. "We should leave town for a bit," Ethan murmured, his hand on her waist. Lauren frowned. "You think she'll retaliate?" Ethan exhaled. "She already has." Before Lauren could respond, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Yeah." A voice, low and unfamiliar, crackled on the other end. "You should watch your back, Mr. Carter." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. The call went dead. Lauren touched his arm. "Who was it?" Ethan's stomach twisted. "Someone who doesn't want me breathing for much longer." Ethan lowered the phone slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. The words echoed in his mind, heavy and undeniably real. "You should watch your back, Mr. Carter." This wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Lauren saw the shift in his expression immediately. "Ethan?" He swallowed hard, gripping the phone. That was a threat. Her breath hitched. "From who?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "I don't know, but I'd bet everything I have that it leads back to your mother." Lauren's stomach twisted. Catherine was already capable of ripping apart lives through money, power, and influence. But this was something darker. "Do you think she'd actually—" Lauren hesitated, her voice faltering. Would she really go that far? Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the city skyline through the apartment window, the weight of reality settling in. "Yeah," he finally admitted. "I think she would." Lauren reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Then we need to be careful." Ethan nodded, forcing himself to take a steady breath. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his life. Not now. Not after everything they had already fought through. "We're not running," he said firmly. "If she wants to scare me, she'll have to try harder than that." Lauren admired his strength. But deep down, she knew her mother well enough to understand one terrifying truth. Catherine never bluffed. And if she had escalated to real threats, it meant she was getting desperate. That made her more dangerous than ever. The next morning, Ethan's paranoia became impossible to ignore. As he walked out of the apartment to grab coffee, he noticed something off. A black SUV was parked across the street, its tinted windows making it impossible to see inside. He wouldn't have thought much of it, except for the fact that he had seen that same SUV the night before, and earlier that morning, his instincts screamed at him. Ethan took out his phone and casually snapped a photo of the license plate. Then, instead of heading to the cafe, he made an abrupt turn and crossed the street, walking in the opposite direction. A few seconds later, the SUV lurched into motion, rolling down the street at a controlled, deliberate pace. They were watching him. Ethan's pulse hammered, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to let whoever the hell was inside that car know they were getting to him. He took a longer route back to the apartment, weaving through side streets, doubling back, making sure he wasn't being followed. By the time he got inside, Lauren was already waiting, concern etched on her face. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He hesitated, then locked the door behind him. "I think someone's following me." Lauren's eyes widened. "What?" He showed her the picture of the license plate. "This car's been outside since last night." Lauren's face paled. She grabbed her own phone and quickly sent the picture to her father. "If anyone can find out who that car belongs to, it's him," she said. Ethan exhaled. "You think she's sending people to watch me?" Lauren didn't want to say it, didn't want to believe it, but they had crossed a line when they exposed Catherine, and Catherine never lost. That night, the tension in the apartment was suffocating. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he glanced at the window, his chest tightened. Lauren was trying to act normal, but he saw the way her fingers drummed anxiously against the table, the way she kept checking her phone for a message from Jonathan. Then, finally, a text. "Jonathan, that car is registered to a private security firm. No official ties to Catherine, but we both know better." Ethan clenched his jaw. She was covering her tracks. Lauren bit her lip. What do we do? Ethan exhaled slowly. We play smart. Lauren frowned. What do you mean? He looked at her, his expression firm. She's expecting me to get scared, to run. If I do that, she wins. Lauren's heart pounded. So what are you saying? Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. I'm saying it's time to make Catherine feel fear for the first time in her life. Lauren studied him, her pulse quickening. She had seen Ethan fight before, seen him stand his ground against every cruel, manipulative game her mother had played. But this was different. Ethan wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was about to go on the offensive, and for the first time, Catherine Whitmore was about to realize something terrifying. She had pushed the wrong man too far. Ethan stood by the window, his hands gripping the edge of the curtain as he watched the black SUV idling across the street. It had been parked there for hours now, just sitting there like a silent reminder that Catherine was watching. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a folder of the evidence they had gathered against her mother. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. She was trying to stay calm, but every muscle in her body was wired with anxiety. Jonathan confirmed the security firm, she muttered, not looking up. They're private contractors. No direct connection to Whitmore Enterprises, but we know who's paying them. Ethan exhaled slowly. Catherine's careful. She won't leave fingerprints. Lauren closed the folder, setting it aside. Then we need to force her hand. Ethan turned, arching a brow. And how do we do that? She met his gaze, a dangerous glint in her eyes. We stop playing defense. Ethan smirked slightly. He liked where this was going. All right. What's the plan? Lauren leaned forward. We expose her publicly, but not in a way she can control. The media can be bought. Lawyers can spin stories. But if we go straight to the right people, she won't be able to stop it. Ethan crossed his arms. Who are the right people? Lauren's lips curled. The federal investigators already looking into her. Ethan's smirk faded. You want to go straight to the authorities? Lauren nodded. We don't leak it to the press this time. We take everything we have and put it directly into their hands. Ethan sat down. Considering, that's bold. It's the only way, Lauren insisted. If the feds get everything first, my mother will have no time to clean up the mess. Ethan thought for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. All right, let's do it. Lauren nodded, determination settling into her bones. We'll need my father's help. Ethan hesitated. You think he'll go along with this? Lauren exhaled. He wants to see her fall just as much as we do. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. It was time to end this. Jonathan agreed to meet them that evening. They chose a discreet location, a private office owned by one of Jonathan's longtime business partners. Far from the reach of anyone Catherine might have watching them, Lauren and Ethan arrived first, waiting in the dimly lit conference room. The atmosphere felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. Then the door opened, and Jonathan walked in, looking more exhausted than ever. You two are playing with fire, he said as he sat down. Lauren didn't flinch. Then let's burn it all down. Jonathan let out a tired chuckle. That's my girl. He pulled out a thick file from his briefcase. I've already made contact with an agent from the DOJ. He's been watching Catherine's activities for months, but he hasn't had enough to move forward. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Until now. Jonathan nodded. Until now. Ethan leaned forward. So what happens when we give them this? Jonathan exhaled. They'll launch a full-scale investigation, subpoenas, audits. Everything she spent years covering up will be dragged into daylight. Lauren's heart pounded. Then let's give it to them. Jonathan slid the file across the table. I'll set up the meeting. Ethan picked up the folder, his fingers tracing over the evidence inside. This was it. The beginning of Catherine Whitmore's end. That night, Ethan barely slept. The weight of everything sat heavy on his chest. He had spent so much time surviving Catherine's attacks, dodging her blows, trying to keep his name from being buried under her lies. But now he was the one making the move. He stared at the ceiling. Lauren curled beside him, her soft breathing the only thing grounding him. They were in this together, and for the first time, he felt like they might actually win. Morning came too fast. Ethan sat at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee while Lauren scrolled through the latest news. Then her phone buzzed. Jonathan, she answered quickly. Dad? His voice was low, urgent. We have a problem. Lauren's stomach dropped. What happened? Jonathan hesitated. The DOJ agent I was in contact with. He backed out. Ethan's jaw clenched. What? Jonathan sighed. Someone got to him. He suddenly doesn't have time to meet anymore. Lauren's grip tightened on the phone. That was my mother. Jonathan exhaled. She's one step ahead of us. Ethan set his coffee down, his body tense. Then we find another way. Jonathan hesitated. Lauren, Ethan, this isn't just about business anymore. If Catherine has the power to shut down a federal investigation before it even begins, that means she's pulling strings we don't even see. Ethan didn't blink. We're not stopping. Jonathan sighed. I figured you'd say that. Lauren exhaled sharply. We'll find another contact. Jonathan paused. I already did. Ethan frowned. Who? Jonathan hesitated. A journalist. Someone who isn't afraid of your mother. Lauren's eyes widened. Who? Jonathan sighed. Adrian Vega. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. The Adrian Vega, the guy who exposed the senator's corruption scandal. Jonathan nodded. If anyone can take her down, it's him. Lauren felt a flicker of hope. Catherine had power, but there was one thing she couldn't control. The truth. And Adrian Vega was known for digging it out, no matter the cost. Lauren nodded. Set up the meeting. Jonathan exhaled. Are you sure? Ethan and Lauren exchanged a look. We've never been more sure, Ethan said. Jonathan let out a small, knowing smile. Then let's finish this. Ethan and Lauren sat across from Adrian Vega in a dimly lit back room of a small, private club in Manhattan. The journalist, known for exposing some of the biggest political and corporate scandals of the past decade, was an imposing figure. His sharp eyes analyzed them with quiet intensity, fingers tapping lightly against his notepad as he listened to their story. This is a dangerous game you're playing, Vega said finally, leaning back in his chair. His voice was low, calm, but piercing. Lauren didn't flinch. We don't have a choice. Ethan crossed his arms. Catherine has already tried to destroy me. Now she's sending people to follow me, to scare me into disappearing. Vega nodded, as if he had already expected as much. That's how people like her operate. She doesn't just want power, she wants absolute control. Jonathan, sitting beside them, pushed the thick folder of evidence across the table. We have enough here to bury her, he said, his voice steady. Financial crimes, political ties, corporate fraud, you name it. Catherine Whitmore has her hands in it. Vega glanced at the folder but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Jonathan. I find it interesting, he mused. You were married to this woman for decades. You built an empire with her, and now you're handing me the very information that will destroy her. Jonathan met his gaze without hesitation. I should have done it a long time ago. Vega nodded slowly, as if assessing the weight of those words. Then, he flipped open the file and started scanning the contents. Ethan and Lauren held their breath as they watched him read, their fate hanging in the balance of this one man's decision. After what felt like an eternity, Vega finally looked up. This is big, he admitted, but it won't be enough unless we move carefully. If I publish this the wrong way, Catherine will bury the story before it even gains traction. We need to make it impossible for her to shut it down. Lauren frowned. How? Vega leaned forward, his voice lowering. We don't just expose her, we force her to answer for it in real time. Ethan arched a brow. Meaning? Vega's lips curled into a sharp smile. We go live. Lauren's pulse quickened. I mean, we set up a broadcast that goes straight to the people. Not just an article. A full televised special. Interviews, documents displayed on screen. Multiple media networks airing it at the same time so she can't silence it. We make sure that when this story hits, there's no way to contain it. Ethan let out a slow breath. That's a hell of a move. Vega smirked. That's why I win. Lauren felt a thrill of adrenaline. How long would it take to set up? Vega glanced at his watch. If you're serious about this. 48 hours. Ethan and Lauren exchanged a look. This was it. The final move. Catherine wouldn't see it coming, and this time, she wouldn't be able to stop it. The next 2 days moved like a blur. Vega's team worked nonstop, gathering additional sources, vetting the documents, and preparing for the biggest exposé of their careers. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lauren stayed hidden, moving between safe locations that Jonathan arranged for them. Catherine's hired men were still watching, but they had no idea what was about to hit them. On the evening of the broadcast, they arrived at the undisclosed studio where Vega's team had set up. Ethan adjusted his mic, his pulse steady but alert. Lauren sat beside him, her hands laced with his, her eyes burning with determination. Jonathan stood near the back, phone in hand, ready for whatever fallout was coming. Vega walked in, a small earpiece tucked into place. "All right, we're live in 5 minutes." Ethan took a slow breath. "Let's end this." The broadcast was a firestorm. It started with cold, hard facts. The financial records flashed across the screen. Offshore accounts, shell companies, proof of millions being funneled into illegal investments. Then came the testimonies. Former Whitmore executives, employees, people who had been silenced for years, finally telling the truth about what Catherine Whitmore had done behind the closed doors of her empire. And then came Ethan's story. Vega turned to him. "Ethan, you've been at the center of this battle for months. Tell the world what Catherine Whitmore did to you." Ethan met the camera's gaze without fear. "She tried to erase me," he said, voice steady. "She blacklisted me, fabricated a criminal record, sent people to follow me, to intimidate me, all because I fell in love with her daughter, and she thought I wasn't good enough." The silence in the studio was deafening, and then Vega delivered the final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, we reached out to Catherine Whitmore for a statement before this broadcast." He turned to the camera. She refused to comment, but it was too late, because at that very moment, the world was watching, and Catherine Whitmore was about to face a reckoning she could never escape. Across town, Catherine's penthouse was in chaos. Phones rang. Lawyers scrambled. The PR team tried desperately to control the story. Catherine stood in the center of it all, staring at the screen with an expression that was impossible to read. Ethan's face filled the screen, his voice calm, unshaken. "She tried to erase me, but I'm still here." Something inside Catherine snapped. Her glass shattered against the marble floor as she threw it, the sound cutting through the panic of the room. For the first time in her life, Catherine Whitmore had lost control. She turned to her team, her voice like ice. "Fix this." One of her advisors hesitated. "Ma'am, we can't." Her chest tightened. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated them. And now, the empire she had spent a lifetime building was crumbling around her. Her legacy, her power, gone. And the worst part, Lauren had been the one to deliver the final blow. Catherine never lost. But tonight, she had been destroyed. The city was still buzzing from the fallout of the broadcast. But in the Whitmore penthouse, everything was silent. Too silent. Catherine sat in her dimly lit office, the glow of multiple screens flashing in front of her. News anchors, business analysts, legal experts, all dissecting her downfall in real time. Catherine Whitmore has officially resigned from Whitmore Enterprises amid a federal investigation. Once considered one of the most powerful women in the corporate world, Whitmore now faces scrutiny over alleged financial crimes, offshore accounts, and political bribery. Another reporter's voice cut through the noise. According to sources, the company's board voted unanimously for her removal. This marks the end of an era for Whitmore Enterprises. Catherine's grip on the crystal glass in her hand tightened. The end of an era. The words echoed in her mind, taunting her. This wasn't just a setback. This was a public execution, and it was all because of her own daughter. She set the glass down gently, inhaling deeply. The weight of what had happened pressed down on her chest, but she refused to let it consume her. Catherine Whitmore had survived far worse, and she wasn't about to let this be the end. Not yet. Meanwhile, across the city, Lauren sat on the couch, her phone vibrating nonstop with notifications. The broadcast had done exactly what they'd hoped. It had taken away her mother's power. Ethan sat beside her, scrolling through his own phone. "It's everywhere," he muttered. Lauren nodded. It worked. Jonathan, standing near the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand, let out a slow breath. "For now?" Lauren turned to him. "What do you mean?" Jonathan met her gaze, his expression serious. "Your mother doesn't know how to lose?" "Lauren, she already lost," Ethan said firmly. Jonathan exhaled. She lost her position. She lost her company. But that doesn't mean she's done. Lauren swallowed hard. She had spent her entire life watching Catherine control everything and everyone around her. Could she really accept defeat? Or was she already planning her next move? Lauren's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ringing of her phone. She looked down at the screen. Her mother's name flashed across it. A cold chill ran down her spine. Ethan stiffened. "You don't have to answer that." Lauren took a slow breath. "Yes, I do." She pressed accept, bringing the phone to her ear. "Hello, Mother." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Catherine's voice, smooth as ever. "Well done, Lauren." Lauren's grip on the phone tightened. Catherine didn't sound angry. She didn't sound desperate. She sounded amused. Lauren's stomach twisted. "You got what you wanted," Catherine continued. "You destroyed me." Lauren's jaw clenched. "You did that to yourself." A soft chuckle. "Did I?" Catherine mused. "I suppose that's how you see it." Lauren closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't want this, Mom, but you gave me no choice." A sigh. "Lauren, you still don't understand, do you?" Lauren's heart pounded. "What don't I understand?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then, her voice dropped colder than ever. "I always have a choice." Lauren felt a shiver run down her spine. Ethan, watching her, leaned forward. "What is she saying?" Lauren ignored him, focusing on Catherine's words. "You think you've won," Catherine murmured. "But you haven't. You've just shifted the balance." Lauren swallowed hard. "What are you planning?" Another chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart, you should know by now. I don't answer questions. I create them." The line went dead. Lauren stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Ethan touched her arm. "What did she say?" Lauren looked at him, her chest tightening. "She's not finished," Jonathan sighed, setting down his whiskey. "She never is." Lauren exhaled sharply, trying to calm her nerves. They had won the battle, but the war, it wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Catherine Whitmore falls from power. Federal investigators close in on former CEO. Whitmore Enterprises struggles to recover after scandal. Lauren scrolled through article after article. Taking in the damage, her mother's legacy was in shambles. Her reputation, her company, her entire empire, all burning to the ground. But something didn't feel right. Ethan walked over, handing her a cup of coffee. "You're up early." Lauren sighed. "I couldn't sleep." Ethan sat beside her, still thinking about the call. Lauren nodded. "She didn't sound defeated." Ethan frowned. "What do you think she's planning?" Lauren shook her head. "I don't know, but I know my mother." She looked at him, her voice firm. "She doesn't go down without a plan." A knock at the door made them both tense. Ethan stood up cautiously. "Are you expecting someone?" Lauren shook her head. Ethan approached the door, hesitated for a second, then opened it. A man in a suit stood there, holding a legal envelope. "Lauren Whitmore?" he asked. Lauren stepped forward. "Yes." The man handed her the envelope. "You've been served." Lauren's breath hitched. Ethan took the envelope, opening it quickly. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then darkened. Lauren watched as his hands clenched around the paper. "What is it?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "She's suing you." Lauren's stomach dropped. "What?" Ethan turned to her, his jaw tight. "Your mother just filed a lawsuit against you." Lauren's heart pounded. She snatched the papers from him, scanning the legal jargon until she saw it. Plaintiff, Catherine Whitmore defendant, Lauren Whitmore Carter claim, defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Lauren let out a breath, her hands shaking. She had taken her mother down. And now, Catherine was trying to take her down in return. Lauren lifted her gaze to Ethan, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "She's coming for me." Ethan nodded, his eyes burning with determination. "Then we fight back." 6 months later, the Whitmore name had been dragged through fire. Lauren stood outside the New York Supreme Court, the autumn wind brushing against her skin as she watched the swarm of reporters gathered beyond the barricades. It had been half a year since she had exposed her mother's corruption. Half a year since Catherine had lost everything. Her empire, her influence, her carefully crafted legacy. And yet, she still wouldn't let go. Catherine's lawsuit had dragged on for months, a desperate attempt to regain control, to punish Lauren for daring to defy her. Lauren took a slow breath, adjusting her blazer. This was the final day. Inside the courthouse, a judge was about to issue the verdict. And whatever happened next, Lauren was ready. Inside the packed courtroom, Catherine Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in an elegant black suit, her posture perfectly composed. But Lauren could see through it. The dark circles beneath her mother's eyes, the tight grip she had on the legal documents in front of her. Catherine was losing, and she knew it. Ethan squeezed Lauren's hand as they sat down beside Jonathan and their legal team. "You okay?" he whispered. Lauren nodded. She had to be. The judge cleared his throat, scanning the final ruling. In the matter of Catherine Whitmore versus Lauren Whitmore Carter, this court finds that the plaintiff's claims lack sufficient legal standing and appear to be driven by personal vendetta rather than factual harm. The case is hereby dismissed with prejudice. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Lauren's breath hitched. She had won. Catherine had lost. Again, the judge continued. Furthermore, given the nature of this case, the court orders that the plaintiff, Catherine Whitmore, cover all legal fees incurred by the defendant. Lauren turned toward her mother. For the first time, Catherine's mask cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles went white. This was it. The moment Catherine finally understood. She had no more power, no more moves left. She had lost everything. Lauren stood, exhaling slowly as she turned to leave. But then, "Catherine," she said, pausing at the plaintiff's table. Her mother lifted her gaze, those cold blue eyes still filled with defiance. Lauren's heart ached, but she refused to waver. "This didn't have to end this way," Catherine scoffed softly. "Didn't it?" Lauren hesitated. Some part of her had always wanted to believe that her mother could change, that maybe, if given the chance, Catherine would choose family over power. But looking at her now, Lauren knew the truth. Catherine Whitmore didn't know how to love, only how to win. And today, for the first time in her life, she couldn't. Lauren let out a slow breath. "Goodbye, Mother." She turned and walked away, Ethan's hand in hers. This time, she didn't look back. 3 weeks later, Lauren and Ethan stood on the balcony of their new home, a small, charming townhouse in Brooklyn, far from the towering glass walls of the Whitmore estate. The weight of the past year still lingered, but for the first time, Lauren felt free. Truly, completely free. Ethan slid an arm around her waist. "No regrets," Lauren smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Not a single one." Ethan kissed her temple. "So what now?" Lauren exhaled, looking out at the city she loved, the place where everything had changed. Now, she turned to him, her eyes full of something new. Not fear, not exhaustion, hope. "Now we finally start living." And with that, they stepped forward, leaving the shadows of Catherine Whitmore behind them forever.